If you are building a company right now, or even just sketching out ideas in a notebook during your commute, you already know that the startup world just absolutely loves its mythology.
Oh, it can completely thrives on it.
Right. We are constantly fed this very specific, almost cinematic narrative of what a successful founder looks like,
Yeah.
how they operate, the exact steps they take to build a unicorn. But today, our mission for this deep dive is to completely dismantle that playbook.
Tear right down to the studs.
Exactly. We are going to look at the actual unvarnished mechanics of building a successful business from the ground up, specifically if you do not fit that stereotypical Silicon Valley mold.
And that is a really crucial distinction to make right at the top. The landscape of entrepreneurship is, it's rarely discussed with the nuance of who is actually standing on the field.
Yeah.
We tend to get these monolithic pieces of advice, things like burn the boats or move fast and break things, that assume everyone has the exact same safety net.
Which they absolutely do not.
No, they don't. So today, we're tearing down that facade to look at a framework designed for the reality most people actually live in.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the source material we are diving into today is just phenomenal. We are pulling exclusively from Kathryn Finney's book, Build the Damn Thing, How to Start a Successful Business If You're Not a Rich White Guy.
It's an incredible read.
It really is. It is part memoir, part tactical manual, and it completely shifts the paradigm of how we think about risk in company building.
To really grasp the architecture of Finney's argument,
Yeah.
we need to establish her core metaphor first,
Yeah.
which frames the entire startup ecosystem.
The video game metaphor.
Right. She argues that entrepreneurship is essentially a video game. The ultimate objective is universal. You want to grow a company, achieve financial success, build a creative life that you actually control.
The dream.
The dream, right. But the catch is that players are not starting on the same difficulty setting. Finney divides the players into two camps. First, you have the entitled's. These are the founders who start the game on the absolute easiest difficulty level. In the context of the game, they spawn with thick armor, special weapons, and unlimited extra lives.
Right. And in the real world, those cheat codes take the form of historical wealth, elite family networks, and an ambient culture that just inherently trusts them and gives them the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly. But then you have the rest of the players, whom she categorizes as the builders.
And this is who the book is really for.
Yes. This group encompasses women, people of color, marginalized communities, and frankly, anyone who isn't a wealthy, well-connected insider.
Basically, most people.
Most of the population. Builders start the exact same game, aiming for the exact same objective, but they are playing on the absolute hardest, most unforgiving settings.
Hard mode.
Hard mode. They drop into the map with no armor, no inherited weapons, and crucially, and this is the big one, if they make a mistake, they do not get an extra life. The margin for error is essentially zero.
It is such a visceral, clarifying way to understand the landscape. And just to set the table for you listening right now, Finney's book relies heavily on her own lived experiences and hard data regarding systemic inequalities, racism, and sexism within the venture capital world.
She brings the receipts.
She definitely brings the receipts. But I want to be super clear. Our goal today isn't to take political sides or debate the politics of this. We are here to impartially unpack her specific findings and the framework she built to navigate that exact terrain.
We're just looking at the realities builders face through the lens of the data she provides.
Exactly. We're reporting on the source material.
It's an analysis of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Because if you are going to play the game on hard mode, you have to understand the specific physics of that mode. You can't use an entitled playbook when you have a builder's inventory.
Which brings me to the core reason you should care about this deep dive today. Have you ever had a true spark of genius, a completely viable business idea, but felt locked out of the resources to build it?
I think so many people have felt that.
Right. Have you ever sat in a room and felt like the gatekeepers were speaking a language designed specifically to exclude you? If that resonates, this is your shortcut. We're going to cover how to get your mind right, how to test your idea cheaply without torching your savings, and how to build a resilient team on your own terms.
It's about leveling the playing field through superior strategy rather than inherited resources.
So let's jump right into the deep end here. To understand the friction in this video game, we have to look at Kathryn Finney's personal origin story. If you rewind to the early 2000s, long before the influencer economy of Instagram or TikTok, she was a pioneer.
A total trailblazer.
She built a massive 7-figure blog empire called The Budget Fashionista. And this wasn't just a cute side hustle. She was writing books, she was appearing on the Today Show, securing major endorsement deals. She had a proven track record of serious business acumen.
She had essentially beaten a level of the game already. She demonstrated she could capture an audience and monetize it efficiently.
Right. So with that massive success under her belt, she enters a prominent New York startup incubator with a brilliant new idea. She wanted to build a tech-enabled beauty subscription brand, specifically targeting the Black hair care market.
A huge market.
Massive. She walks into this incubator with a built-in audience of over 1 million monthly readers and a target demographic that spends billions of dollars. But instead of being met with enthusiasm, she is met with completely blank stares and ultimate rejection.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychology of that rejection.
Yeah.
Finney attributes this wall to a concept known in venture capital as pattern matching.
Pattern matching.
Yeah. To understand why she was rejected, you really have to look at the financial mechanics of VC funds. Investors manage vast pools of capital, and they are legally obligated to seek massive, outsized returns for their limited partners.
They need home runs.
They need grand slams. Because historical, highly publicized successes in the tech world often look like Mark Zuckerberg. Young, white men from elite institutions like Stanford or Harvard investors developed a heuristic.
A mental shortcut?
Exactly. They lazily rely on that exact same visual and educational pattern to predict future success. They figure, the last guy who made us $1 billion looked like this and went to this school, so let's just find another one of those.
But Finney points out the massive fallacy in that logic, doesn't she?
A profound fallacy.
Yeah.
The reality is that the vast majority of failed founders also look exactly like that pattern.
Right. Most startups fail.
The failure rate is astronomical across the board. Yet because builders don't fit that narrow demographic profile, they register as unknowns to these incredibly sheltered investors. The investors equate unfamiliar with too risky. It is a cognitive bias that actively blinds them to lucrative opportunities because they're so fixated on the packaging.
It is absolutely blinding, and the specific anecdote she shares from the book about this incubator pitch is just staggering. She is pitching to a room of about 70 tech CEOs and investors.
Tough room.
Very tough. She stands up and pitches this recession-proof beauty subscription for Black women. And she brings the undeniable data. She points out that Black women make up roughly 6% of the U.S. population, but they account for nearly 50% of all hair care product purchases in the country.
That is a wildly disproportionate market share.
It's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity staring them in the face. The pitch itself is flawless. But when the cohort leader asks the room for feedback, one famous tech executive literally says out loud that he doesn't do Black women.
You really have to pause and analyze the cognitive dissonance in a statement like that.
It's wild.
These are individuals who pride themselves on being contrarian visionaries. Their entire identity is based on seeing around corners, disrupting global industries, finding alpha where others aren't looking.
Right. They're supposed to be geniuses.
But presented with a highly lucrative, data-backed consumer base, they couldn't grasp the economic viability simply because the target demographic existed outside their immediate social circle.
And it wasn't just him. Another tech executive in the room actually told Finney that she couldn't possibly relate to her own target audience because she had an accountant.
Oh, that part is infuriating.
As if having basic financial management disqualified her from understanding beauty consumers. It is absurd.
It reveals a total lack of intellectual curiosity from the gatekeepers.
But the real gut punch comes during her one-on-one meeting with the founder of the incubator, a man she refers to as the Voldemort of venture capital.
Great nickname.
Perfect nickname. She goes into his office, pitches the business model, and he actually gets it. He's drawing on the whiteboards, he's tracking the margins, he's super enthusiastic.
He sees the math.
He sees the math. But at the very end of the meeting, he completely deflates the room. He tells her it is a phenomenal idea, but he doesn't know of any investor who has ever backed a Black woman, and therefore it is highly unlikely she will ever get funding.
Wow.
He essentially tells her that the pattern matching of the industry is a structural wall that she cannot climb, regardless of how good the math is.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the video game metaphor, it perfectly illustrates what hard mode looks like.
Yeah.
The primary obstacle she faced wasn't a lack of market size, it wasn't a flaw in the product economics, and it certainly wasn't a lack of capability on the founder's part.
Not at all.
The insurmountable obstacle was the systemic inability of the gatekeepers to recognize value when it didn't arrive in the exact packaging they were conditioned to buy.
Which gives us a massive foundational takeaway for you listening right now. If you have ever pitched a great idea and been dismissed, patronized, or ignored by gatekeepers, you have to stop internalizing their lack of vision as a reflection of your potential.
That's so important.
Finney's experience proves that rejection is very often about the gatekeeper's intellectual limitations and sheltered worldview. It is their blind spot, not your failure.
That is the vital pivot point for any builder. Once you recognize that the external system is operating on a flawed, biased heuristic, you realize you cannot look to that system for validation.
You have to look inside.
You have to turn your attention inward to fortify yourself against it. You have to build an internal architecture that can withstand that level of irrational rejection.
And that transitions us perfectly into Finney's framework. The very first step before you even think about building a product or a pitch deck is building your internal foundation and defying the expectation of failure.
The foundation is everything.
Finney is adamant that a CEO's self-care is the company's self-care. It's not a luxury, it's a structural requirement. She uses the analogy of a wheel. You, the founder, are the hub. If the hub is fractured, stressed, or emotionally broken, it doesn't matter how strong the spokes are, the wheel cannot turn. You have to get your mind right first.
And getting your mind right as a builder involves navigating a very specific, very heavy psychological hurdle that entitled simply do not face.
Let's talk about that.
The text draws a sharp distinction regarding how failure is processed. In the classic Silicon Valley ethos, entitles are given permission to fail. In fact, failure is often celebrated as a necessary stepping stone.
It's like a badge of honor.
Exactly. You build an app, it burns through $10 million, it fails, you write a Medium post about your learnings, and you get funded for your next venture the very next week.
Right. It's treated like a tuition fee for their entrepreneurial education.
Precisely. But builders are burdened with the expectation of failure. For a builder, a failed venture is rarely seen as a learning opportunity. Instead, the system views it as definitive proof that the builder never belonged in the room to begin with.
That is so heavy.
It is. The ambient expectation from the market, the investors, and sometimes even their own communities is that they will inevitably fall short. That creates an immense, often paralyzing pressure where every single move feels existentially fraught.
It is an incredibly heavy burden to carry. But Finney doesn't just outline the problem. She shows how to actively defy that expectation. And to do that, she shares the incredible story of her father, Bob Finney.
Oh, I love this story.
It is one of the most powerful parts of the book. Let's talk about Bob.
It's a masterclass in resilience and rejecting the narrative imposed on you.
It really is. So, Bob Finney was a black teenager living in Milwaukee in the 1960s. He is a brilliant kid, straight-A student, and he has a dream. He wants to be a surgeon.
A high achiever.
Highly ambitious. He goes into his high school guidance counselor's office to talk about college and his medical ambitions. And the counselor looks at this brilliant kid and tells him to forget about college, focus on learning a manual trade, and just go work in the local brewery.
Unbelievable.
The expectation of failure, the ceiling on his potential, was set right there by an authority figure.
He was explicitly told that his trajectory was predetermined by his demographic, not his intellect.
Exactly. So Bob ends up serving 2 tours in Vietnam, comes back home, and does exactly what the system expected of him. He takes a job working at the Schlitz Brewery in Milwaukee.
Fulfilling the prophecy.
He is fulfilling the prophecy. But then, the brewery suddenly shuts down. The local economy is devastated, and Bob finds himself driving a Little Debbie's snack cake delivery truck just to keep his family afloat.
Now, this is the critical juncture. This is where the builder either succumbs to the expectation of failure or pivots.
And Bob pivots. While he's driving that snack truck, he finds an opportunity at a local workforce development center. He decides to take a massive risk and enrolls in a Saturday class to learn basic C++ programming.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
We have to remember the context here. This is the 1980s.
Right.
Personal computers are not ubiquitous. Programming was a completely obscure, unknown frontier for a guy driving a delivery truck in the Midwest.
But he takes the class anyway. That single Saturday class leads to an unpaid internship. That internship leads to an entry-level position at a computing pioneer company.
The dominoes start falling.
Then he makes the terrifying decision to uproot his entire family, leaving the familiar, established community of Milwaukee to move to the totally unfamiliar world of Minneapolis for a better tech job.
That takes so much courage.
He took his shot, defied every single expectation placed upon him by that guidance counselor, and eventually rose to become a senior software engineer at Microsoft, retiring as a millionaire by age 50.
Incredible.
He categorically refused to let the expectation of failure define his reality.
What is so instructive about Bob Finney's story is the micro steps of resilience. He didn't jump from the delivery truck to Microsoft overnight. He used a tiny opening, a Saturday class, to wedge the door open. The text provides another fascinating example of this specific type of resilience, looking at Beyoncé.
Yes, the Star Search story.
Right. Before Beyoncé became this untouchable global icon, she was an 11-year-old girl in a singing group called Girls' Time. They managed to get on the national television show Star Search, which at the time was the absolute pinnacle of talent discovery.
If you won Star Search, you were set.
You were set. They got on national TV and they lost. They were beaten by a rock band called Skeleton Crew.
Skeleton Crew, I always forget the name.
Exactly. And the expectation from many people around them was that the dream was over. When you lose on national television, the narrative is usually that you missed your one shot. Parents pulled their kids out of the group. Managers quit. The expectation of failure was closing in.
But she didn't accept that.
No. Instead of accepting that verdict, Beyoncé and her core team analyzed the failure. They looked at what Skeleton Crew did better, they pivoted their style, they practiced relentlessly, they renamed the group, and they eventually built Destiny's Child.
They treated the devastating public failure as raw data to improve,
rather than a final judgment on their worth.
That is the essence of the builder mentality. Now, I want to contrast that grit with what happens when you have an entitled mindset that becomes completely paralyzed by the fear of failure. Because if you have always been protected, the prospect of public failure is terrifying. Let's look at the Star Trek Vegas flop.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is such a revealing anecdote about how ego and the fear of failure can actively stifle massive innovation.
It's a crazy story.
It is. If we look at the early 1990s, there was this incredibly ambitious, fully developed plan to build a life-size replica of the USS Enterprise from Star Trek right in the middle of downtown Las Vegas.
Life size.
Life-size. It wasn't just a museum. It was going to be a massive interactive attraction intended to rival Disney World and completely revitalize the downtown Vegas area.
It sounds incredible. And it wasn't just a pipe dream either.
Not at all. The funding was completely secured from a consortium of local Vegas business leaders. The city planners were on board. The mayor was championing it. From a financial standpoint, it was entirely risk-free for Paramount Pictures, the studio that owned the Star Trek rights.
They didn't even have to pay for it.
They didn't have to put up the capital. All they needed was the final green light, the literal signature from the CEO of Paramount, Stanley Jaffe.
And he kills it. He completely axes the entire project. And his reasoning is just astonishing. He was terrified of public humiliation.
Yeah.
He reportedly argued in the boardroom that if a studio makes a bad movie and it flops at the box office, it's embarrassing, but people forget about it in a few weeks. But if he signs off on a giant life-size spaceship in the middle of Las Vegas and it fails, it is a permanent physical monument to his failure.
It would be there forever.
It would be there forever. He let his own personal, ego-driven fear of failure kill what could have been one of the most revolutionary entertainment projects of the decade.
It perfectly illustrates the danger.
Yeah.
Jaffe had the ultimate entitled position CEO of a major studio, yet he was paralyzed because he couldn't handle the potential expectation of failure.
Right.
Builders don't have the luxury of letting fear paralyze them because they are already operating in the failure state according to the system. To push through that, Finney outlines a specific framework for what actually makes a great founder, moving far beyond just having a clever idea. She calls them the 4 Ps.
Let's break down the 4 Ps.
The first is potential. This is an abstract potential. This is your specific domain knowledge, your unique life experiences, and your network. The second is process.
Okay. Process.
A great founder doesn't just have an idea, they have the systemic ability to turn that idea into a functioning business model. The third is performance. This is about execution, holding high standards, actually delivering on the process. And the fourth, which is perhaps most crucial for builders, is pivot.
Pivot. Let's talk about pivot.
Pivot is your willingness to recognize when a path is failing, abandon your ego, and change direction with a growth mindset. It is the anti-Stanley Jaffe approach. It is what Beyoncé did after Star Search.
And to truly embrace those 4 Ps, Finney argues we have to actively unlearn the garbage advice that the industry constantly feeds us. She identifies the 5 lies that the tech bros and gatekeepers tell builders to keep them intimidated and out of the game. Let's debunk these right now, because if you're listening, you've probably internalized at least one of these.
The first lie is pervasive. The lie that you must know how to code to build a tech company.
Completely false. Finney herself didn't know how to code when she built her blog empire. She used the tools available. And today, the landscape is flooded with incredible low-code and no-code tools.
It's never been easier.
You can build complex functioning platforms without writing a single line of Python. You absolutely need to understand how technology serves your business, and you need to be able to communicate with developers eventually, but you do not need to be a software engineer to be a CEO.
Lie number 2 is the pedigree myth, that you must go to an elite university. We touched on this with the pattern matching. The gatekeepers love to claim that the best founders come from Stanford or Harvard, but that is simply a self-fulfilling prophecy because that is the only place they look.
Exactly.
The text points to massive successes like Steve Jobs, who dropped out of a small liberal arts college, or Richard Branson, who never attended university at all. Business acumen and grit are not geofenced to Ivy League campuses.
Lie number 3. You must follow the rules and pay your dues. Builders are constantly told to work the system, get a corporate job, climb the ladder, and wait for their turn. But guess what? Entitles don't follow the rules.
No, they don't.
Mark Zuckerberg didn't go work in middle management at IBM for 10 years before he was allowed to start Facebook. He just built it. Builders have to create their own rules and their own tables because the existing rules were literally drafted to exclude them.
Lie number 4 is a matter of definition. The idea that you must build a specific type of tech startup. When Finney was pitching her beauty subscription business, she was patronizingly told it wasn't a real startup because it wasn't a SaaS platform or a search engine.
Right.
The truth is, a startup is simply a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. Anything can be a startup if it uses technology to scale rapidly. Companies selling khaki pants like bonobos, companies selling dental floss or human resources software, they are all startups. In the modern economy, every company is a tech company.
And finally, lie number 5, which I think is the most damaging for early-stage founders. You must protect your idea in a vault. I see this constantly. People have an idea for a new food delivery app, and they want everyone to sign a non-disclosure agreement before they even say the name of it out loud.
It's so common.
It is completely counterproductive. Here is the truth. Your idea is fundamentally worthless. Execution is the only thing that has value. If you lock your idea in a vault, sure, no one can steal it, but you also can't get customer feedback, you can't attract co-founders, you can't get funding, and you can't actually build it. And burning your limited capital trying to secure expensive patents before you even have a customer is a massive trap.
Unlearning those 5 lies is the final cognitive step in clearing away the noise. You stop playing by their artificial rules. And that naturally transitions us into the practical application. Once your internal foundation is solid, what actual day-to-day tools do you need to survive the grind of entrepreneurship?
Which brings us to step 2, gathering your personal success toolbox. I want to frame this for you listening. How do you protect your peace, your mental health, and your core integrity while you are grinding away at a business that demands everything from you? Because burnout is the quiet killer of startups.
It really is.
Finney outlines very specific tools for this personal success toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one sounds like a buzzword, but she applies it in a strictly tactical way.
Yes, the first tool is mindfulness. But Finney isn't talking about retreating to a mountain ashram. She frames it through the lens of elite performance, specifically referencing Michael Jordan.
Okay, Jordan.
If you watch footage of Jordan at the free throw line, before he takes the shot, he always takes a very deliberate, deep breath. He wasn't doing that just to relax his muscles. He was doing it to create a microscopic fraction of space between thinking and doing.
Creating a gap.
When you are a startup founder, you are bombarded with hundreds of micro-decisions every single day. Taking a single mindful breath gives you the necessary pause to react with strategic intention, rather than just operating on pure, stressed reflex. It slows the game down.
It's about maintaining control of the tempo. Tool number 2 is vital. Naming your price. This means sitting down right now, before the money gets real, and defining your core values. You have to decide what the absolute line is that you will not cross. You have to know exactly what your integrity costs.
And Finney gives some incredible examples of this.
Look at Dave Chappelle. He famously walked away from a $50 million contract for Chappelle's show because he felt the environment was compromising his creative integrity and twisting his core values. He knew his price, and when the studio crossed it, he walked.
Another brilliant example from the text is the creator, Michaela Cole. She was developing her masterpiece series, I May Destroy You, which was based on her own deeply traumatic personal experiences.
Such a good show.
Netflix offered her a $1 million upfront deal for the show. But the catch was, they would not allow her to retain any percentage of the copyright ownership. It was a take-it-or-leave-it offer.
And $1 million is life-changing money.
It is. But because she knew her price, that owning her own trauma and her own story was a non-negotiable core value, she turned down the $1 million. She walked away, pitched the show to the BBC and HBO where she could retain ownership, and the show went on to win multiple Emmys. You have to know your price before a gatekeeper tries to buy you out of your own values.
If you don't define your values, the market will define them for you. Now, the third tool is knowing thyself. And this comes with a very painful, poignant story from Finney's own journey. She was in a high-stakes meeting with a major potential investor. She had prepared obsessively. She could recite her customer acquisition costs, her lifetime value metrics, the total addressable market. She had the business pitch completely dialed in.
Down to the penny.
But during the meeting, the investor paused, looked at her, and asked a surprisingly simple question. He said, "Who are you?"
And she realized she completely froze. She couldn't answer it.
Exactly. She knew her business inside and out, but she hadn't taken the time to define her own personal mission statement. She didn't have an elevator pitch for Kathryn Finney. Because she couldn't articulate who she was at her core, the investor passed. She lost the funding.
It's a hard lesson.
Because at the early seed stage, investors aren't just betting on a spreadsheet. The business model is probably going to pivot anyway. They are betting on the resilience and character of the founder. If you don't intimately know who you are, how can you expect someone else to bet millions of dollars on you?
So how do you actually codify that self-knowledge? The text suggests adapting a classic corporate strategy framework for personal use, the SWOT analysis. You must ruthlessly and honestly map out your personal strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
You have to be honest with yourself.
This requires a level of vulnerability that is uncomfortable for a lot of people. You have to admit what you are genuinely bad at. If you are a visionary, but you are terrible at operational details and managing spreadsheets, you have to define that as a weakness so that your very first hire is someone who excels at operations.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because once you've done that harsh SWOT analysis and you know your blind spots, you build the next tool to cover them. Your personal advisory board, or PCAB. Now, to be clear, this is not your company's formal board of directors. Those people have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders. Your PAB is your personal emotional support system. These are the people who want you to win, regardless of whether the company survives.
Finney is very specific about the architecture of this board. It shouldn't just be an echo chamber of your best friends. You need 4 distinct roles filled. First, you need the BS meter.
The BS meter.
This is the person in your life who loves you enough to call out your delusions. When you are high on your own supply and think your terrible pivot is actually brilliant, the BS meter brings you brutally back to reality.
You absolutely need that person. Role number 2 is the motivator. Building a company is lonely and exhausting. There will be days when you are literally crying on the floor, convinced you ruined your life and you want to quit. The motivator is the person you call who reminds you of your why, picks you up, dusts you off, and pushes you back into the arena.
Third is the listener. Sometimes you don't need actionable advice. You just need to vent about how unfair a vendor was or how frustrating a client is. If you vent to a problem solver, they will try to fix it, which can be exhausting. The listener just holds space for you to safely process the stress without judgment.
And the fourth role, which might be the most underrated, is the personal comedian. You need levity. Entrepreneurship can go to some very dark places. You need someone who can completely pull you out of the business mindset and make you laugh. Finney notes this could be a funny friend, a child, or honestly, even your dog. It's about breaking the tension.
It is about engineering strategic emotional support. And you can deploy this board in highly tactical ways. Finney gives a brilliant example of how she uses her PA. She specifically placed her mother on her board to act as a defensive shield.
Her mom is the bouncer.
Essentially, yes. Whenever Finney achieves a public success, a news article, a fundraised, dramatic, distant relatives tend to pop out of the woodwork asking for money or favors. Instead of draining her own emotional energy dealing with them, she delegates that entirely to her mother, who expertly blocks them. It protects Finney's focus.
That is next-level delegation. Now, the final tool in this toolbox is, without a doubt, the most practical and arguably the most important piece of advice in the entire book. It is called the exit number. And if you are listening to this at your day job right now, please hear this clearly. Do not quit your job immediately just because you have a brilliant idea.
The narrative of burning the boats. The idea
Yeah.
that you must quit your job and risk absolute ruin to prove your dedication to your startup is an incredibly toxic, entitled narrative.
It's terrible advice for most people.
It assumes a safety net. Builders do not have the median historical wells to fall back on if they fail. If a builder burns the boats and the business fails, they aren't moving back into their parents' summer home in the Hamptons. They are facing devastating financial ruin. Quitting without a calculated safety net is financial suicide.
So instead of burning the boats, Finney tells you to calculate your exit number. This is a cold, hard math equation. You need to figure out the exact bare minimum amount of money you need to survive for 1 full year without touching a single dime of your savings. You go through your bank statements line by line. You strip away the non-essentials.
But, and this is a critical caveat Finney makes, you must keep the things that actually spark joy and preserve your mental health. This isn't about complete asceticism. If a $6 daily latte is the one small ritual that keeps you sane and focused while you are grinding 80 hours a week, keep the latte in the budget. Calculate that lean but sustainable monthly figure.
Let's say you do the math, and your lean monthly survival number is $4,000. That is your exit number. The golden rule is this. You do not hand in your resignation letter at your 9 to 5 until your side hustle business is consistently generating that $4,000 in personal revenue. You build the bridge before you jump off the cliff.
It is a mathematical, deeply pragmatic approach to risk management. It allows you to build with clarity rather than desperation. And once you have your mental foundation fortified and your practical toolbox sorted, you are finally ready to start working on the actual business idea itself.
Which brings us to step 3. Translating an idea into a problem to solve.
This is a monumental shift in perspective.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Having a great idea is simply not enough. A brilliant idea in a vacuum is completely useless. You have to internalize this. Businesses exist for one reason and one reason only: to solve problems. If people will not pull out their credit cards and hand you their hard-earned money to pay for your solution, you do not have a business. You have a very expensive hobby.
The transition from an egocentric idea to a customer-centric solution is the most critical pivot an early-stage founder must make. An egocentric idea sounds like, I want to build this app because I think the interface is cool and I want to be a tech founder.
Right.
A customer-centric solution sounds like, I am building this specific workflow because accountants are losing 10 hours a week to manual data entry, they are in pain, and they will pay me to fix it. To force this transition, the text outlines the 4 questions of a pain point.
Let's drill down into these 4 questions because this is how you validate your idea. Question 1. Is it a real pain point? Don't just sit in your room and guess. You have to look for evidence of the pain. Go on Twitter, go into niche Reddit forums, read Amazon reviews of existing products. Are people actually actively complaining about this issue?
Question 2. Is the problem scalable? This is where many founders trip up. You might have found a problem that annoys you personally, but does it annoy millions of people? If you are the only one with the problem, it's not a market. You can use tools like Google Trends or keyword research to see if a significant volume of people are actively searching for solutions to this specific pain point online.
Question 3. Will people actually pay for it? This is the ultimate litmus test, and Finney notes that builders have to be especially diligent here. Because of the historical market inefficiencies we discussed earlier, products or services that cater to marginalized groups are frequently undervalued by mainstream investors.
Constantly undervalued.
Therefore, builders cannot just assume the market will see the value. They must gather overwhelming, undeniable data to prove that their specific demographic has the buying power and the willingness to pay for the solution.
And finally, question 4. Is it a repeatable customer base? This dictates your entire business model. Will a customer buy your solution once in their entire lifetime, like a wedding dress? Or will they buy it once a month, like a software subscription or a consumable product? A repeatable problem is much easier to build a sustainable business around than a one-off problem.
To illustrate what happens when you skip these 4 questions and just run with an egocentric idea, Finney shares a deeply personal, very tough story about her family's dry cleaning disaster.
It is a perfect case study in the dangers of unvalidated ideas.
After her father, Bob Finney, passed away, the family was reeling. Kathryn, her brother, and her grieving mother decided they wanted to honor his entrepreneurial spirit by starting a business together. They decided to build a modern, high-end, tech-enabled dry cleaning and laundromat business in Minneapolis.
Now, none of them had any experience whatsoever in the dry cleaning industry,
Zero.
which is highly regulated with environmental laws and complex machinery. They were blinded by grief and just wanted to throw themselves into a project to stay busy.
They fell in love with their own idea. They completely skipped the unglamorous process of researching the customer's actual problem. They didn't stand outside existing laundromats to observe behavior. They didn't ask customers if they actually valued tech integration or if they simply wanted cleaner floors and machines that didn't eat their quarters.
Instead of validating the problem, they threw massive amounts of capital at their assumptions. They literally hired the former CEO of IKEA to act as an incredibly expensive consultant for a neighborhood dry cleaner.
I still can't get over that, the CEO of IKEA.
It is almost comical in hindsight, but it was a spectacular, devastating failure. They burned through well over 7 figures of capital. The stress caused massive rifts within the family. And the ultimate humiliation was that they actually ended up being investigated and featured on a local television consumer watchdog news report.
Just a total nightmare.
All of that financial and emotional destruction happened because they had an idea they loved, but they never confirmed if the customer actually cared.
Contrast that tragic failure with startups that successfully identified and solved massive validated pain points. Look at companies like Thinx or Ruby Love. They didn't start with a vague idea. They looked at a highly specific recurring problem affecting 800 million people globally every single month.
Menstruation.
Right. They looked at the discomfort, the expense, and the unreliability of traditional menstrual products, and they engineered period-proof panties. They solved a painful, repeatable problem that people eagerly pay for.
Or look at a B2B example like Gusto. They didn't just want to build cool HR tech. They recognized that running payroll, dealing with tax compliance, and managing benefits is a massive, terrifying, recurring headache for the 30 million small businesses in the U.S. They built an outsourced solution that took the pain away. They solved a scalable, repeatable problem.
That is the difference between a vanity project and a viable business. So if you were listening right now, I have a homework assignment for you. Take your current big idea, the one you've been sketching out. Look at it critically. Now, rewrite it completely from the perspective of your customer's pain. Let me give you a simple example. If your idea is, I want to start a taco truck because I love cooking, that is an egocentric idea. Nobody cares that you love cooking.
They only care if they're hungry.
Exactly. Rewrite it as, my specific neighborhood has no access to fresh, authentic food after 9 p.m. within a 10-mile radius, and shift workers are hungry. Do you see the difference? You just transformed a personal desire into a solvable community problem. That is how you build a business.
That shift in perspective is mandatory. But even once you have defined a legitimate problem, how do you know if your specific solution is the one the market actually wants? You can't just assume your answer is the right one. That leads us directly into step 4, product market fit and the build, measure, learn loop.
This is where the rubber meets the road. How do you find out if people actually want what you're selling before you spend your life savings building it? You use the build, measure, learn feedback loop, and the core mechanism of this loop is the MVP, the minimal viable product.
The MVP is a concept that is frequently misunderstood. An MVP is not your final polished product. It is not even a beta version. It is the absolute cheapest, fastest, most basic iteration of your idea that you can put into the real world to test a specific hypothesis. Finney provides a very strict financial rule of thumb for this. You should spend no more than 10% of your monthly exit number on your MVP.
Wait, let's do the math on that to be perfectly clear. If we go back to our earlier example, and your lean exit number to survive is $4,000 a month, your total budget for your MVP is $400. That's it.
Exactly. The goal of the MVP is not to build a beautiful prototype to impress investors. The goal is strictly to see if strangers will give you their email address, or ideally their credit card number, based on the promise of your solution.
I want to share an incredible example of using this loop to find product market fit, and it involves a company called Squire. 2 Black entrepreneurs wanted to modernize the barbershop experience. So they went into the build phase. They built an app designed for barbershop customers, the guys getting the haircuts, to easily book appointments. They built it, launched it, and absolute crickets. Nobody used it. The business was failing.
But instead of just giving up, they entered the measure and learn phases. Through talking to users and observing the market, they realized their core hypothesis was wrong. The guy getting a haircut once a month wasn't in enough pain to download a new app. The true customer, the person experiencing daily scalable pain, was the shop owner.
The owner.
The owner was dealing with missed appointments, terrible payment processing, scheduling nightmares.
So what do they do? Because they didn't have the domain knowledge of running a barbershop, they took a radical, incredible step to learn. They took their remaining life savings and physically bought a struggling barbershop.
That is dedication.
They went behind the counter. They immersed themselves in the daily operational pain points. By intimately learning the actual problem from the inside out, they completely pivoted the software to serve the shop owners, not the end customer. They found product market fit through extreme learning. And today, Square is valued at nearly $1 billion.
That is an extraordinary dedication to the learn phase of the loop. They bought the laboratory to study the experiment. But Finney makes it clear that you don't have to buy a brick-and-mortar storefront to test your idea. She outlines a brilliant, incredibly cheap method for the everyday founder, which she calls the ugly baby test.
I love the ugly baby test. Here is exactly how you execute it. Let's say you have an idea for a new meal prep service. You do not go buy a commercial kitchen. Instead, you go to a site like Squarespace or Wix. You spend $25 in 2 hours building a super basic one-page landing page. You put a nice stock photo on it. You explain exactly what the service does, and you put a big button that says sign up for early access, which just collects their email address. Then you take $100 and buy highly targeted Google or Facebook ads aimed at your exact demographic.
And then you step back and watch the data. The metrics will tell you the truth. If you spend $100 and get a click-through rate of over 1% or 2%, and people are actually entering their emails, you have validated that strangers are interested in your solution. You have traction.
Crucially, you do not use your friends and family for this test. Do not ask your mom or your best friend if they like your idea. Friends and family will lie to you. They love you. They don't want to hurt your feelings. So they will look at your terrible idea and tell you your ugly baby is beautiful. The open market has no such emotional attachment. The market does not care about your feelings. The market tells the brutal truth. You need strangers to validate the idea.
And ignoring the market or bypassing the ugly baby test can be financially devastating. The text shares a cautionary tale about a founder named Mary. Mary had an idea for a salon booking app, but instead of doing a $25 landing page test, she completely bypassed the MVP phase. She withdrew $35,000 from her 401k retirement account to hire an overseas development team to build a fully functional, complex app.
She burned her retirement.
She spent her life savings without ever testing if the market wanted it. And when she finally launched, she realized she was entering a space that was already heavily dominated by massive, well-funded giants like MindBody. The app failed, and her retirement fund was gone. A simple $100 MVP test would have shown her the lack of traction and saved her $35,000.
But this raises a really complex issue, specifically for builders. What happens when the broader market or the corporate gatekeepers of that market completely refuse to recognize the value of your community? The ugly baby test relies on a functioning, rational market. But we know the market is often irrational and biased.
This raises an important question. This is where Finney's story about her organization, Digital Undivided, is so powerful. It addresses what you do when the market is literally blind to your existence. Finney wanted to host a conference called FOC US 100. The goal was simply to connect Black and Latinx female tech founders with venture capitalists and investors. It was a clear need. So she built the conference, pouring $30,000 of her own money into it, and went to secure corporate sponsorships.
And the corporate sponsors balked. They refused to fund it because they genuinely did not believe the market existed. They told her, to her face, that there weren't enough Black female tech founders to justify a conference.
So the immediate feedback from the measure phase was that the corporate market wasn't buying. A standard entitled pivot might be to say, the market has spoken, the idea is dead, and move on. But Finney knew from her own lived experience that the market was wrong. The founders existed, they were just being ignored. So instead of quitting, she initiated a massive, grueling research initiative called Project Diane.
Since nobody else would collect the data, she and her team did it themselves. They painstakingly scoured the internet, manually verifying companies, and they gathered the raw, undeniable data. They published a report proving that in 2015, there were exactly 84 Black women-led startups in existence that had raised a specific threshold of funding.
By publishing that undeniable hard data, she exposed a massive systemic failure in venture capital. She quantified the blind spot. And that data sparked an absolute movement. By forcing the industry to look at the hard numbers, she literally changed the physics of the market. By 2017, just 2 years later, funding for these specific founders had increased by 500%.
That's incredible.
When the market refuses to see you, sometimes you have to build the data yourself to force their eyes open.
It is a phenomenal example of macro-level problem solving, which brings us to the final, critical piece of the framework. You have fortified your mindset. You have your personal toolbox. You have found a validated problem. You have tested it cheaply and found product-market fit. But you cannot scale a company alone. You need to build a team. This is step 5, squad goals and values-first leadership.
Building the team is where many brilliant visionaries fail as operators. How do you manage the people who are going to build this dream with you? Finney breaks down the phases of team building, and she starts with a stern warning about the most common and, frankly, the most dangerous early hires: friends and family.
Oh, this is such a trap. It is incredibly tempting to hire your cousin or your college roommate because early on they are essentially cheap or even free labor.
Okay.
They will work for equity promises.
But the text is unambiguous here. The relational dynamic you have at the Thanksgiving dinner table is the exact dynamic you will have in the boardroom. People do not magically change their personalities just because you incorporated an LLC. If your older brother has patronized you and talked over you your entire life, he is going to patronize you and talk over you when you are the CEO. If you do not fundamentally respect your family members as competent professionals, do not go into business with them. It will destroy the company and the family.
That is such a crucial boundary. So what about bringing on an official co-founder who isn't family?
Finney equates a co-founder relationship to a marriage, with all the legal and emotional entanglements that implies. You must outline responsibilities, equity splits, and vesting schedules in writing immediately. Ambiguity in the early days breeds deep resentment later. Furthermore, you have to have very uncomfortable, transparent conversations about personal risk tolerance.
Right, because risk looks different to everyone.
Exactly. A single 24-year-old founder living on a friend's couch with zero debt has a vastly different risk tolerance than a 42-year-old founder with a mortgage, car payments, and 2 children. The 20-something might want to leverage the company to the hilt to grow fast, while the 40-something might prioritize steady, profitable cash flow to ensure they can draw a salary. If you do not align on those fundamental realities before you start, the partnership will fracture. Finney even suggests taking a literal 3-day road trip together before signing any operating agreements.
A road trip. That is brilliant. Put yourselves in a confined space, get lost, deal with a flat tire, and see if you can actually tolerate each other's problem-solving styles under minor stress. If you can't survive a road trip, you will never survive a Series A fundraising round.
Now, as you move beyond founders and start hiring actual employees, Finney advocates intensely for a concept called values-first hiring. She details her own process when she launched her venture studio, Genius Guild. She didn't start by writing out technical job descriptions for developers or marketers. The very first thing she did was establish 8 core, unshakable values for the entire company. Things like be human, be abundant, be brilliant, be brave, be mindful, be agile, be open, be committed.
That sounds great on a motivational poster, but how does that actually play out operationally when you need to hire a coder?
The logic is actually incredibly pragmatic. In a fast-moving, early-stage startup, job descriptions are essentially works of fiction. What you hire an employee to do on a Monday might be completely irrelevant by Friday because the company has pivoted based on new market data. If you hire someone purely for a specific hard skill, say, a specific coding language, and then the company pivots away from that language, that employee either becomes obsolete or deeply frustrated. But if you hire, and crucially if you fire, based on core values, you build a resilient, adaptable culture. Values remain static even when the entire business model changes.
So you screen for values first, but you still need certain types of operational thinkers on the team to actually build the product. Finney outlines 4 crucial archetypes that every startup needs to function effectively.
Yes. The first archetype is the doer. This is the engine of the company. This is the person who just gets things done without needing to debate the philosophical implications of every single task. You say, we need a landing page by tomorrow. And the doer puts their head down and builds it.
Second is the lieutenant. This is your chief of staff, your COO, your right hand. The founder is usually a visionary, throwing off 10 crazy ideas a minute. The lieutenant's job is to catch those ideas, discard the terrible ones, and take the brilliant ones and translate them into actual step-by-step operational workflows that the doers can execute.
Third, you need the strategist. While the doers are intensely focused on today's tasks and the lieutenant is focused on the goals for this quarter, the strategist is looking 5 steps ahead. They are constantly scanning the horizon, anticipating market shifts, analyzing competitor moves, and figuring out where the company needs to be in 2 years.
And finally, the fourth archetype is the economist. This is the person who truly understands the path to profitability. They manage the burn rate, the cash flow, the margins. But Finney makes a very sharp caveat here that we need to highlight. While you absolutely can and should hire an economist or a CFO, you, the CEO, must fundamentally understand the basic economics of your own business.
You cannot abdicate financial literacy. You don't need to be a CPA, but if you don't understand your customer acquisition cost versus your lifetime value, you are not steering the ship. You are just a passenger.
You have to know your numbers. And speaking of numbers, I want to give you one massive tactical takeaway regarding hiring that trips up so many first-time founders. When you finally decide to hire that first official employee, you must calculate the true cost of bringing them on. If you offer someone a $50,000 base salary, they do not cost your business $50,000. You have to add roughly 20 to 25% on top of that base salary to account for the employer portion of payroll taxes, unemployment insurance, basic benefits, software licenses, and administrative overhead. That $50,000 employee actually drains over $60,000 from your bank account. If you don't model that true cost into your runway, you will burn through your cash and bankrupt the company in months.
It is about financial discipline, and that discipline extends to the culture. Finney reinforces the golden rule of startup management: hire slow and fire fast. If someone violates the core values of the company, you must remove them immediately to protect the peace and the ecosystem you have so painstakingly built.
Wow. We've covered an incredible amount of ground today. Let's pull this all together. So what does this all mean? We started by recognizing the harsh reality that the entrepreneurship video game is inherently unbalanced, but that the entitled cheat codes are not the only way to beat the game. We talked about conquering the crushing expectation of failure by looking at the resilience of Bob Finney. We packed a mental toolbox with mindfulness, clear core values, and a personal advisory board. We learned how to transform a selfish idea into a problem that customers will actually pay you to solve. We discussed testing that solution for less than $100 using the ugly baby test. And finally, we explored how to build a resilient, values-driven squad to scale that vision into an empire.
It is a comprehensive, fiercely practical roadmap. But as we wrap up, I want to leave the listener with a final thought to ponder, something that synthesizes everything we've discussed. If you identify as a builder, you have likely spent your entire life navigating a society and a professional world that was fundamentally not designed for you to succeed in. You have spent decades deciphering unwritten rules, reading the subtext of rooms, making $1 out of 15 cents, and consistently doing exponentially more with significantly fewer resources.
It is exhausting, but it is a reality.
Now think about what a startup actually is at its core. A startup is an environment of extreme uncertainty, severely limited resources, and constant daily chaos. Therefore, the very systemic biases and hardships that have marginalized you in the traditional corporate world are exactly the forces that have forged your greatest competitive advantage. Haven't you already been training for the chaos of a startup your entire life? The immense grit, adaptability, and resilience required simply to exist and thrive as a business builder in this society is the exact blueprint required for entrepreneurial success. You already possess the hardest skills to learn. This framework just teaches you how to point those skills at a business model.
I have absolute goosebumps. That is so incredibly powerful. You have been training for this your whole life. You already have the armor. You just had to forge it yourself. Listener, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this has equipped you, inspired you, and demystified the process. Take these tools, protect your peace, run your ugly baby tests, and go out there and build the damn thing. I'll see you next time.